Yay, I think we are live. Happy Wednesday, besties and bosses. I feel like we've got so much to talk about today. This should be a fun live stream. I'm gonna make sure I can pull this up in my group. I'm kind of pulling this up to make sure I can see all of your comments. Let me know how you're all doing. How was your weekend? How's the beginning of your week been? I think I shared this on Instagram. I'll share it with you all. I had a wonderful weekend. I had a really good friend in town from New Zealand that I got to spend some quality time with, but I also got severely dehydrated in my spin class on Friday evening. And I haven't gotten dehydrated like that since I was training for a half marathon when I was like 21 in Florida. And I mean, this was like near throw up, like all the dizziness. So I am on an electrolyte regimen. I've been starting my day with electrolytes and I've got my water here, but actually this is like a little side note. I think there's such a relevant business lesson in this because we talk so much about mindset or clarity, mindset, strategy, and action. And I talk so much about how action we don't want to just do for the sake of doing, or it's not just about doing more. It's about how less can be more, the 80-20 principle, and it's the quality of your action, the intention of your action, and the potency of your action, right? That really brings in those results. And I was thinking about this with hydration. I drank quite a lot of fluids and quite a lot of water, but something I've really learned, having now been dehydrated twice, is that it's not just about, how much water can you consume, it's the quality of the water. It's, are you getting enough electrolytes into your system, right? You can actually drink less, but get more potency from it if you have those electrolytes in there. And I think there's just such a beautiful lesson in that for us as business owners, or a reminder as well. I see lessons in everything we do, but it was a big lesson to me. But that was my weekend. I had a beautiful weekend, but also definitely was in a little bit of rehydration rehab, if that's a thing. Anyway, today's conversation, I'm sure you can tell by the title, and if you listen to the podcast, you already know the cat's already out of the bag. Let's jump into that. But we're going to talk about why I'm ending my podcast one question, unapologetic questions for unapologetic results after 195 episodes, which I think is nothing to sneeze at. And then I also want to tell you not just why, and because I shared the question I've been asking in business for about the last 6 months that really led to this decision on the podcast itself. I think that last episode is definitely worth listening to, if nothing else, to play with that question and to see the thought process of a CEO, and especially at the multi 6-7 figure level in business, because this is how I'm approaching business, thinking about business. I want to share today, so we're not just having the same conversation all over again, a little bit more nuance with the why around this. I think a lot of questions can come up when people make changes like this. It can be very confusing for you as a business owner. If maybe you've just started a podcast, I think it can make you wonder, is podcasting dead? Does this mean podcasting isn't good? Does this mean you need to change your strategy? So I want to, and podcasting is not dead, like I'll just share that right now. I want to share a little bit more nuance, but then I also want to talk about the components every marketing strategy needs to be effective and to bring in reoccurring revenue. This is what I am supporting clients with all day, every day, but this is also what allowed me to make this decision very confidently and to know making this decision it's not going to impact my business negatively in terms of revenue. So I want to share that part with you as well, because I think otherwise you're going to hear some context, which is helpful, but I want you to be able to apply this to your business and understand how to think about how to make these decisions, but also what your marketing strategy really needs so you can get those results consistently for you. Because I think if you know that and you know how to put that into place, that means you can pivot, adapt, change throughout the years in business, but always trust and know you're going to have clients and revenue coming through the door. So that's what I want to unpack today. If you are live with me, say hi, let me know you're here. We are giving away to one person who's live and leaves a comment, a copy to a past masterclass I did that's not live. It's podcast, what is the title? I can't remember the names of my own classes here. What is this called? This one is called Podcasting That Pays Off: Secrets, Lessons, and Takeaways for You After 100 Episodes. So this is a masterclass I did after 100 episodes with my podcast, and really breaking down what I say secrets in air quotes, but really what to think about if you are using podcasting or really any marketing strategy, whether it's live streams or podcasting, what you want to think about in terms of leveraging that and how to think about using that for your growth, but also for your results on the back end. So one person we will give that away to. I think it's a pretty valuable class and also really relevant. Tinley says, hi, love you, Kim. I love you so much. I'm so happy to have you here. Love. All right, so let's dig in, because I have quite a lot I want to dig into. I do want to share the behind the scenes piece, but I also do want to dig into that marketing strategy component piece. So let's just start. I think this is just, I just want to be as transparent as possible because I know I've seen business owners who are successful in our space make decisions, and it can feel very, I think, jarring and confusing when someone makes a decision and you don't understand why, especially if it's something you're either thinking about doing or doing yourself. And so I've seen people, pull programs before or shut their business down completely or make big pivots. And I think it is just, I often wish I understood their thought process because I think it's really normalizing as a business owner, but I think it's also helpful for your understanding on, what is and is not true in the online space, what is and is not true in business, but also how to make those decisions yourself. So like I said, if you're hearing, oh my gosh, Kim has been super consistent, she's had a podcast, 195 episodes, that's been a vehicle in her marketing strategy that has brought in clients and helped her to be successful and to help her, stay fully booked as a one-on-one coach. If you have any of those thoughts going through your mind and then you're like, why would she shut this down? Does this mean podcasting doesn't work anymore? I just want to first, I know I already said this, but I just really want to be clear because it feels almost like irresponsible to me if I don't speak to this. Podcasting is not dead. Podcasting is growing by the second. It is still a very viable platform to share content. And so I want you to hear that if you're thinking about starting a podcast, or if you want to have a podcast, or if you already have a podcast, right? That is just not a thing. Podcasting is still very much alive and kicking. What is true, and then I'll share my thought process here, but I think what is true and important to understand is overall leveraging any platform in 2024 does take a little bit more intentionality, a little bit more work. It is just I feel like work is like the horrible 4-letter word in our online space that no one wants to acknowledge they're doing. It does take effort to grow on any platform, full stop. It always has, but it is just a very saturated space we are all in. That is not a bad thing. I feel like I'm saying this every single week. That also means there are more people who trust the online space, who are consuming, who are ready to buy, right? This is not a bad thing, but it is simply the truth. And so I do think for all of us, we have to think about where are we focusing our energy? How do we do less better instead of spread ourselves thin? Because if you're spreading yourself thin across platforms, across strategies, it is going to feel a little bit like you're spraying and praying, and it is going to be more challenging to bring in results. Now, that's not why I made this decision on my podcast, but it is something that came into play and that I factored in. I just need a quick sip of water. Speaking about hydration, y'all. I was sharing how I got super dehydrated this weekend. Okay, so in terms of, I just wanted to disclaimer that because I do know people's brains are gonna, I feel like it's just very easy to hear one piece and to make an assumption and then to apply it to your business, especially if you're not trusting your strategy or you're not seeing the results you want. Podcasting is a really great platform. And again, podcasting is evergreen. I mean, there's so many benefits to having a podcast. Now with my podcast, I think the other thing to speak to, I think it's also easy to hear something like this and be like, oh, that means it sucks to have a podcast, or Kim didn't like podcasting. And so I can't speak for everyone. Podcasting might not be the tool, the platform for you, but I will say I loved recording every single one of those episodes. I love my podcast. I'm very, very proud of the body of work I created. For those of you who don't know my podcast, I think what's helpful to know is that podcast isn't going anywhere. That body of work is living there. We have 195 episodes that will stay there that you can continue to go back to and listen. And I particularly both loved I think it's a very intimate, just an intimate form of content, right? I sincerely felt like every week when I was going to record, I had my coffee or my water or whatever it was, we were sitting one-on-one, having this private conversation. I always recorded in my closet. I loved that. I also am really proud of the podcast itself because I feel like, excuse me, losing my voice. I feel like I brought something I really wanted to the table in our industry. And I think it is a slightly different podcast. I think it is a slightly different conversation than we're usually having in the business space. For those of you who don't know the podcast, it's called One Question, and we unpack one question every episode because as a business coach, I'm also a business mentor, but on the coaching side of my work, the belief I have is that every business owner I work with is a healthy, empowered adult that has all the answers inside of them. And my job is to, yes, mentor and guide and to give suggestions and to help present opportunities or options that I see. But it's also to be able to ask better questions and the right question to elicit responses. I've been talking a lot about messaging and content recently and how important that is in your whole business strategy from marketing to sales and what a role that plays. And I know I could just give you, right, a framework for messaging or for content, or if I'm coaching you, I can ask you better questions to help elicit and to pull those answers out of you. And I've just seen over and over again how I've had clients come to me who have spent, $45,000 in group programs or masterminds where they've been given all of the answers, right, for the correct messaging, the correct content, the correct marketing strategy, and really had a hard time moving forward. Whereas we can have one coaching intensive. This is what we do in your Marketing Multiply, my new coaching strategy intensive, right? We can just have one intensive, and through asking the right questions, through asking better questions, I'm able to draw out and elicit, like, what is the right word choice? What are there people really thinking? What strategy makes the most sense for you and for your business? So the podcast really covers that and has that philosophy, and I am really proud of that because I think most podcasts are just more giving you the answers, and I really want to be a voice for what coaching really and truly is, along with that mentorship. So I'm proud of the podcast and that body of work, and I'm sharing this all because I'd love for you to go back and listen to it, but for you to hear, none of this was like I'm burning this down because I don't like it or because it's not aligned. But I also, and then I want to read Tinley's comments here. I also really pay attention to my business and to the feedback I'm getting. And I, as many of you know, I only do one-on-one. So I'm on calls with clients all day, every day. I'm in quite a few spaces with peers. And because I've been offering some more free coaching sessions, and because we've done more of the strategy intensive, we opened up some spots for those for your Marketing Multiplied Strategies intensives, which I have been loving. I've just been seeing more of what right now people are really needing. I'm just seeing how that podcast serves such a great purpose. It's sort of like you get a mini coaching session from me, and how much we are, or how much I'm desiring to really deepen the conversation, to widen the conversation in terms of what I can share with you, but also just how when I do a masterclass, that is the thing. I'm getting messages from many of you. My last masterclass, 20K Months Multiplied, I'll drop a link to it because we made that evergreen. I had someone literally message me and tell me they watched it 5 times and took notes on it, and they were crying because it was so beneficial to them. I've had some of you reach out from live streams where we've just been able to workshop topics more, reach out to say, just from watching a couple of live streams, how that's really helped you to shift some things in your strategies, or to have big ahas, or to go on and quite literally make a 10K sale, or to have a 10K month because of what you implemented. And so I just saw this need that I think has probably always been there, but I think because things are so much more saturated, I'm just seeing this need and this desire for me, because I've always, one of my top values in my business, aside from serving my clients well, has always been to show up with free value that is as good as paid programs, and to not put it behind a paid wall. And so that's kind of where I was sitting when I made this decision. I'm going to pause with the rest of where my decision came from, but I just want to see. Tinley says, I love your podcast because it's raw, truth, mind-opening questions, and simple action steps to take each week. Also, such a beautiful insight into what it's like working with you too, coming from someone who's been stuck with you. You've been stuck with for 4 years. I am not stuck with you. I love you. But I appreciate you so much for saying that. And I think I said this on the final episode, which is a very different conversation. I also just appreciate, and so thank you for everyone who's listened to that podcast, because I do think it is a different business owner who wants to be challenged on a podcast and have questions asked of you, as opposed to answers spoon-fed to you. Hey, Alyssa, nice to see you. Alyssa says, sorry to see the podcast go and lose more chances to hear from you, but so respect you sharing your decision-making process. Oh, thank you for saying that. I will share, Alyssa, in a moment, my honest thoughts about letting this podcast go, because I think that's probably helpful to hear as well. All of this to say, though, and if this is just helpful for everyone to hear, I am seeing this need and benefit for you, the people in my audience, and for my clients, of just having this conversation widened and deepened, and in a way that I quite honestly thought about just pivoting the podcast format and changing what we were talking about on the podcast so we could widen the conversation, except those are the conversations we're having in this Facebook group. Those are the conversations we're having on lives. And in many ways that felt like what I was going to be doing is just replicating what we're doing here. And what I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, what I do know to be true, and I am not being a worry monger, but this has always been the truth in business, right? Doing less better will always get you bigger results. Spreading yourself thin is just always going to water down the results you get. And in today's current climate, it does, I believe, just take a little bit more intentional thought and, again, not effort, like hard word burning out, but intentionality is probably a better word to say there, to really have any platform or anything working for you. And so I thought about, well, we could just expand the podcast. We could change the podcast. I could rebrand the podcast. I could rename the podcast. But to me, what I felt like we'd be doing then is doubling up what we're doing here. And instead of really being able to deliver a mini masterclass to you every week, which is essentially what we do a free training here every week, and to really spend the time focusing on what I really believe that is going to best serve you and being able to both widen and deepen the conversation I want to have with you, I felt like what I was going to be doing is sort of like half doing you service on both platforms, trying to meet the same need. So that's kind of the higher level reason for why we made that decision. And I'll share a little bit in terms of why I know it won't hurt the business. Now, I will say, just from in terms of like, how do I feel about this? Because I'm sure it can be like, oh, I must like feel weird. I will share like God honest truth. I don't even know if I believe in God, but like the truth. Don't judge me if you're super religious, but that's a side note there. But the truth is, when I was thinking about letting the podcast go, the hardest part for me was, quite honestly, my ego. And my ego in that it's a body of work I'm really proud of, and we've had 195 episodes, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, but it's almost like the high achiever brain in me, wants just to like keep adding more episodes for the sake of adding more episodes. Like that ego part of my brain, that was honestly the part that I was just like I don't want to let this go. And I like hearing Tinley's beautiful reflection on the podcast. Like, I know because I hear from clients how beneficial it can be, and I mean, it feels good when you hear that, right? Like it is a nice to your ego. And I also know that it has, many people when they hire me tell me they go and binge a bunch of episodes. So I was like, that was probably the hardest part of making this decision, quite honestly. But I know that that's all ego, and I had to look at strategically what makes sense for the conversation I want to be having with you, and for this current season in business, and for me and my business, and where I feel like I can best show up to support you and serve you for free, while also best showing up to support and serve my clients. And so we're going to talk about this is where understanding the components that go into a marketing strategy come into play, because I took a look at my overall marketing strategy and customer journey. And because I was able to look at that and see where the podcast fits into that, it was actually and understand the data points there, it was actually quite easy to make this decision. And once I made this decision based on seeing what this means for my business and what this means personally in terms of what I really desire to share with you, ego aside, it was actually a very easy decision to make. I think I made this, I talked this through with my coach. I want to say we made this decision. I mean, this sounds silly, but like, I really think we made it in about 15 minutes. And I think this is maybe helpful to hear for y'all, just in terms of like thinking like a CEO, because I was coming from that place and really looking at this decision from that level, as opposed to from ego or from emotionality. It was both an easy decision to make, but it's also I think this is one of the strengths I have as a business owner. When I make a decision, I tend to do so quite neutrally, quite strategically. When I make a decision, I go all in with the decision. I take action quite quickly. And what I don't do is sort of waffle or go back and forth or kind of overthink, or like, but what about this? Or what about this? Or like, but what about that? Or like, well, but maybe I should still try a little bit. I started implementing what I'm gonna share with you that we're announcing after this pretty much that day, I think, if not the next day. I mean, I think to the degree that my coach was sort of like, you have time with this. But I reflect that here because I do think with something like this, it's easy to think that this is something that has to be this like huge weighty decision in your business. And I'm not suggesting anybody else needs to stop their podcast, but if you're making decisions or pivots to change an offer, for example, or to create a new offer, or to drop an offer in your business, we think it can be this like big, heavy thing. And I do think decisions and pivots in business need to be looked at, and we want to do so intentionally. We want to look at the information and not just be impulsive. But what I find is when we're doing so from a very neutral, strategic place as a CEO, as opposed to from an emotional, ego-driven place, hopefully that makes sense in terms of those two different sides of us. And to have an ego is human. And I also think as an entrepreneur, we need a little, maybe people will disagree with us, but I actually think we need a healthy amount of ego to be entrepreneurs in terms of some of that drives us. And I think the emotionality piece as business owners, right? I bring a lot of emotion to my work. I don't want to shut that down. But when I'm showing up in my business as a CEO, I don't want to bring in ego and emotion. I want to come in really from that neutral, grounded, strategic place. And that's what makes it so much easier to make decisions. When I'm waffling on anything, I know that means I'm probably in my feels, that means I'm probably in my fears, or that means I'm probably in my ego, right? There's something going on there. And I don't want to make that wrong, but I always want to address the right gap, right? Or the right problem to solve. That to me means it's probably actually not that I'm even thinking about the strategic decision. I've got something else I need to address here first. So hopefully that makes sense there for y'all in terms of yes, sincerely, I'd be lying to you if I didn't. I mean, I love the podcast, and there's a part of me that, of course, I'm gonna miss hanging out in the closet and recording that and getting to share that. And I'm very proud of that body of work. And one of the benefits of a podcast, y'all, if you have one, is that it's evergreen. It's not going anywhere. There's 195 episodes for you to binge. That lives on and will continue to live on. But that emotional side is not the place I want to make decisions in my life from. And I want to read Tinley's comment. This is maybe, I don't know if this is the best example, but I think of this when I was living in Los Angeles and I both moved to New York City and decided to stop acting. Those are two huge, I moved to New York City with no job to completely start over, no idea what I was doing next. And I acted for a decade, and that was my everything, right? And those are two very big life decisions, and I made both of them pretty quickly and didn't turn back. But I think it's what we're talking about here. I did the work to process the ego, the emotionality, all of the things that come up with big parts of our life, and then I was able to very neutrally, strategically really look at what I wanted next. Both moving to New York and ending acting, I made very clear decisions and acted on them pretty quickly. I made the decision to move to New York and did so. I want to say it was within 2 weeks, and within a month I had sold everything in LA and moved here and kind of started over. And I'm not saying everybody needs to have a decision-making process like me, but what served me there, and I think what serves me in business and what I want to invite all of you to think about is once I made those decisions, I made those decisions and backed those decisions 100% and put both feet or my whole ass into it, so to say, as opposed to sort of oh, but maybe I should do that. Maybe I should move to New York, but maybe I should also stay in LA. Or maybe I should ease out of acting and also do this other thing, right? I made these very clear decisions, which made it a lot easier to take action and to have success on the other side. I think if I had been kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out with either, it would have been very challenging to have success in business or to still be in New York City 10 and a half years later, because this is a city that can be challenging. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of the thought process there. I do want to talk about the marketing side of things though. Tinley says attaching the ego from the facts and what you're truly desiring for the future of your brand. That hits the heart. Oh, I'm so glad that lands. Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? And I'm hoping, Tinley, thank you for saying, and Tinley says decide then go. Yes, decide then go. Two things I want to touch on that Tinley said there, and then I will speak about the marketing components, which are almost the easy part here, but that's also what allowed me to make this decision confidently. So I want to talk about that. I hope for you all hearing this, there is some permission here in that scene. Your business is also going to evolve. Your brand is going to evolve. And I know we hear so much about pick and stick in business, and I ascribe to that, right? Pick and stick is pick a strategy, stick with it, right? Work it until it works. And I think it can sometimes be confusing because we hear that, and at least if you're someone like me, where the ego gets attached to that, but also I don't know, I'm a type A, recovering perfectionist, high achiever, I hear pick and stick, and to me that can sometimes in my brain think, and that means you can never do anything else. And so I hope hearing this is permission giving to see, I did pick and stick. 195 episodes is still 100. I mean, that's, I think, more episodes than a lot of podcasts that have been around for a while. We I pick and stuck. What's the right framing there? And I've been in business for 8 years, and my business has evolved. My brand has evolved. Our industry has evolved. The needs of you and my clients have evolved. What y'all need, what I think, the way I think I can best show up to support and serve you has changed from when I started the podcast, whatever that was, 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago. I forgot how many, it's probably 4 years ago. If I'm doing the math correctly on that, right? And so permission for two things to be true here. Yes, pick and stick is absolutely what I would also suggest and mentor a client around, and permission to also see that your business is an ever evolving, growing entity. Like, I think of it as like a breathing, living thing. That's the same for your messaging. That's the same for your offers, right? That's the same for your strategy. And so we're going to talk about the marketing components, right? Those general components, our general framework, we want to keep the same, and we don't want to go changing shit every single month. But permission, if you're in business for 8 years, 10 years, to also know when to take a look at something and to evolve or to pivot. I did share this in the podcast. Emily Hirsch did an episode on her podcast where she did a case study on Abercrombie and Fitch, and they've been in business for 100 years. I think it's about 100 years. And they had a time period, for all of the reasons I think we can probably all imagine, where they were really struggling. And the reason they're thriving today and that they've been in business for 100 years is not because they just picked one thing 100 years ago, one message, one brand identity, one offer, and just stuck with that for 100 years. It's that they've also been willing to pivot, to adapt, to listen, to notice, to pay attention to what is changing, whether it's, I think for us it's a little different because we're not a huge company, but with ourselves, with our clientele, with the industry, with the world, right? And to adapt with that. And so I hope hearing this decision and some of the thought process behind it is just, it maybe is permission giving for some of you, and a reminder that I think this doesn't mean we need to always be changing all of the things in our business. I've been going live in this Facebook group for years, and I have no intention of stopping, but to also see there are opportunities to both pick and stick, but sometimes to make decisions and to pivot. And I hope you can see that both things can be true. And then yes, when you make that decision, right, you can be slow to make a decision, but when you make that decision to go, I do think that is a CEO level skill set, to be able to make confident decisions and go. And oh gosh, we could have a whole other conversation around that. So I'm not going to take us down a rabbit hole there, but I do think that's something important to hear in terms of the thought process. I don't know if you have anyone who's watching and on the replay as well, let me know if you have any questions, because I do want to talk about the marketing piece, but this might be the more interesting piece for all of you. So if you do have questions, let me know. But if you don't have questions for me in terms of my decision-making process or how I came to that or the why, then I will change or pivot a little bit here. Then I will talk about the marketing components your business needs to make consistent revenue, reoccurring revenue. And I want to help you see how it seems like almost two different conversations here, but understanding this and understanding what your marketing strategy needs, my understanding of what my podcast was fulfilling within my marketing strategy is also why I was able to confidently make this decision. So what I think is just important, I'm just going to make this like as simple as humanly possible. And if you want to go more in depth with this, I'll drop a link after this live stream, my masterclass, The Path to Consistent 10K Months. It's a free masterclass my team made at Evergreen for you. It walks through how to set up this marketing strategy and customer journey for you in your business to really set you up for consistent 10K months and above, and how to apply this to your own business. So I will drop a link for that so you can go more in depth with that. But big picture, this is what I'm always looking at in my business, and this is what I'm supporting clients with to make sure that they have, this is what we're doing in that masterclass, is your business, I think, and the reason I want you to understand this is because what I see for a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people who come to me and hire me, I find a lot of people have one part of this or one area of this holistic marketing strategy that's working really well, or they just want to focus on the part that's working really well. And oftentimes, I would say more often than not, if you are not making reoccurring revenue in your business, you're probably missing one of these components, or one of these components needs a little bit of love from you. And so that's traffic, right? You need a traffic source. That whether that's Facebook ads or posting in other Facebook groups or being a guest on other people's podcasts or SEO or doing reels, right? You need a traffic source. You need a way to get in front of new humans to start new relationships. And with that, you need a way to be visible, right? I think visibility and traffic sources I think we conflate them, but I really see those as two separate things, because traffic is where are the people coming from? And visibility is, I think it can touch on quite a different things, like how are you getting visible to that traffic source and to the people that you are starting to bring into your world. So I see those as two different things. I think in the Path to Consistent 10K months, I use this example, but I think it's helpful to hear. I live in New York City, and there is, down the street from me, there is this like coffee shop bakery. Well, let me describe this better. There is this I live in Dumbo, and it's all these like big warehouse type buildings, like storefronts and everything. And so if you're a storefront there, right, and there's tons of traffic. This is one of the most popular areas in New York City because we have the most Instagrammable spot in the city. So there are a ton of tourists that come here. So if you have a store and you put it in Dumbo, you're naturally getting a traffic source. However, just because there's a traffic source, it doesn't mean that people are going to pay attention to your store. And so the stores, the restaurants that do really well, yes, they're getting that traffic source. Like every tourist that comes through the city and is on the sidewalk, right, they're getting that traffic, but they still have to do something to capture that traffic so that people know to come into their store. And there's a kind of like a big warehouse like building that has a bunch of stores a couple blocks away from me. And I have walked by that building. I've lived here since mid-COVID, so mid-2020 for years. And it is not until maybe 6 months, a year ago that I learned there is a coffee shop and bakery inside of there. I love coffee. Like, I know all the good coffee shops around here. But the reason I didn't know that is because they had traffic coming by them all the time, but they were not on the sidewalk. And it wasn't until one day they made one of those little sandwich boards and literally put it on the sidewalk so that when I was walking, I could see that, oh, there's some really great coffee in there. And then one day there was actually a kid, I guess, working for them who ran out and asked me if I wanted to buy cupcakes. Right, but they had to do something to get visible to that traffic source for me to know they existed. So you need traffic and visibility, right? Like, but these are two different pieces. Hopefully that makes sense. Then we need a way to nurture people. So especially here, right? You can have you can have ads, you can get visible, right? You can be posting reels all day long, you can get visible, but if we don't have a way to deepen the relationship, to nurture our audience, we're just going to build a big audience that is just going to sit there. And so I'm always thinking about this with my clients and in my business, right? We want a traffic source. We want a way to get visible, to start new relationships. And then we want a way to deepen and to nurture the relationships in front of us. And then we need a conversion tool. We need something that is going to help otherwise we're just nurture. Like, this is when you get friend zoned, right? Nobody wants to get friend zoned when they're dating. You don't want to be the person where it's like, man, you are just my best friend, and I'm gonna we've just nurtured this relationship, but all the intimacy and spark is gone. There's no chance for any romantic relationship. I think that happens all of the time in business. So I don't want you to get friend zoned. So we need the traffic source, we need the visibility, we need a way to nurture that relationship. But we want to take it to the next level, right? We want to make it more intimate. You need a conversion tool. So those are the different components. If I were just going to break down very simply what a marketing strategy needs to be effective to, yes, grow an audience, and yes, have an engaged audience, and yes, to build a know, like, and trust, but to build that in a way that brings in consistent sales and clients, those are the components your marketing strategy needs. Let me know if that's making sense or if you have questions. Hopefully that makes sense. And so again, what I see for so many people who hire me, and people who hire me who have massive audiences, right? But they're not seeing consistent revenue come through the door. And why I have clients who have an audience of 500 people who are making $1 million per year, right? I think we get confused as to what creates results. It's often because there is a component in this marketing strategy that's either missing, or it's not getting enough attention or love, or needs some refinement. So we need all of these, or this is the other thing, I think what happens a lot is people will get really good at one of these parts, these components in a marketing strategy, or you'll take a course on one of these components of a marketing strategy and you'll see results from that. So for example, if you get really good at, let's say you get a great traffic source and great visibility, so you get really good at growing an audience, right? You can grow an audience to over 100,000 people, right? And and that feels like you're getting results, right? Because you're seeing your audience grow. What I see then is people just keep focusing on what's giving them that audience growth, that result, which is important, but that's all they're focusing on, but they're not focusing on the nurture or conversion tool part. Does that make sense? And so this is how I'll have someone who has and this is true, I've had people who have an audience of over 100,000 people hire me. They know how to grow an audience, right? They know how to get traffic. They know how to get visible. They know how to grow and engage audience, but what we have to work on is the nurture and the conversion tool part, because what's not happening is our consistent sales and consistent revenue. And so, but because they've gotten really good at this one part of their strategy, which is important, or because they've taken a program that's taught them how to like really hone in on this one part, right? It's really easy just to kind of get stuck in a rut and then to not understand then why you're not getting the results you want. Because in some ways what you're doing is working, right? I'm just using this as an example, but if you're just really good at the traffic source and visibility, let's just say Reels for an example. I need a sip of water. On Instagram, and it's growing your audience, right? And you're seeing that working. I think most people are like, well, I will just do this all day, every day. But then we're missing all of the components that an effective marketing strategy needs to create that customer journey that's going to bring in those consistent sales. So you always have people coming into your pipeline. I think one of the biggest challenges we saw after, and then I'm going to see these comments here, after kind of our boom in 2020, what I really saw for so many clients and new clients who hired me as a challenge point is that there almost wasn't a need to keep a pipeline full. And when I say pipeline, I just mean people who are coming into your world that are potential clients that you're warming up. So like not just people in your audience, but people who are really in your potential client pipeline that are in your customer journey in that deeper level. And that pipeline dried up for people because it just wasn't necessary in the same way, because 2020 was just kind of like a shit show and a free for all. And it was just like, if you just put a bunch of shit out, people were coming through the door. And what's happened since is I've just seen a lot of people where it's like, oh, I don't have a pipeline, but I kind of like don't know how to build this pipeline. And I think it's just created a lot of challenges. Anyway, not to go down a side tangent there, but I just want you to see how this all works together and why it's so important. Claire says, hey, Kim, so true. Yay, so nice to see you here. So glad this is making sense. So again, I'll drop the link to the Path to Consistent 10K Moms because we go into this in more depth. But I overall want you to understand those different components. So if nothing else, if you walk away from this conversation, you're like, oh, great, I can see I do have all of these. I just need to keep working these. Or if you're not bringing in consistent sales or consistent new leads into your pipeline, right, to nurture into your business, you can also take a look at where, if we look at what your marketing strategy needs, where is there maybe a hole that we want to plug, or that we want to, what's that gap we want to close. This is when people are hiring me for my new strategy intensive, Your Marketing Multiplied, we're looking holistically at what does your marketing strategy need, right? Which piece do we need to, the gap to close, and then also tying the messaging. You really need to have that pop so that you can bring in the right people, not just a bunch of randos. So I'll drop a link for that as well. So I hope if you walk away with nothing else, you understand that. But bringing it back to the podcast. So when you have an understanding of this and you know what you're doing in your business and why you're doing it and what function it is serving in your marketing strategy, it also makes it a lot easier to make strategic decisions. So I've always said this with the podcast. I've said from day one, I don't need the podcast in my business to book clients or to have a fully booked practice. I've always said I do the podcast because I quite honestly love the podcast. In many ways, when I added on the podcast, I wouldn't say it was like a bad idea, but it costs more time and money to have a podcast than a live stream, for example. And so in some ways, like we were paying more money to get the same results because I don't have unlimited spots in my business. I think if I were selling a group program or something that were a course, that would be a little bit different. But I've always said I don't need the podcast. And yeah, in many ways it was an additional expense that I was very willing to make because it was a conversation that was really important to me to have and to contribute to our industry. Y'all probably know this, but I'm like I'm like a coach's coach. Like I heart coaching as much as mentorship and business. And so it really was just something that was a passion project as much as something that of course also brought in clients and nurtured people who became clients. But the reason I said that, the reason I said we don't need the podcast, and the reason I was able to make this decision pretty easily when I saw, you know, kind of like the conversation I wanted to shift and like really where I wanted to focus my attention and energy to serve all of you better, is because I know that the podcast was really a nurture tool in my strategy. And I already have a nurture tool in my strategy, which is what we're doing here, right? These live streams, these mini masterclasses, these trainings, these are my nurture tool that I've been doing every week for, I don't know how long we had this Facebook group, probably 6 years. So when I started the podcast, I was duplicating a nurture strategy in my business, in my marketing strategy, which is why I've always said I don't need this. It's not because I'm like, oh, I'm so cool, I don't need to have a podcast. It's because I already had something in my strategy that was serving that function, right? I was doubling up on that. And that was okay. And that was a choice I made. And I was like very happy to make it. And, you know, it did serve us, and it absolutely serve to also, you know, nurture and bring in clients. But I want you to understand that's why I was saying that. It's not because podcasting doesn't work or because I didn't need a podcast or for any of those other reasons. It was simply because it was duplicating an aspect of my marketing strategy that I already had in place. And that's also then why when I was sitting back and looking at, I want to start having a different conversation. I think people need to hear something different from me right now. I'm desiring to go more in depth into certain topics. Do I bring this to the podcast? Do I not bring this to the podcast? Right, when I was going through making this decision, this is why it was also easier for me, right? When I wasn't in ego, when I was in CEO, neutral, strategic thinking brain, it was much easier to make a decision to say, you know what, it doesn't make sense, especially knowing that it does cost more money to produce the podcast, and especially knowing that it does, if I want to continue to have the podcast and to open and widen the conversation there on top of the live streams, right? That could, just in terms of the intentionality I want to bring to the table and the cost to produce this and the effort that's required to grow right now, right? That we could be both spending more money and getting fewer results, right? It just made it a lot easier to make that decision. Now, had my podcast been my only part of my nurture strategy, this might have been a different decision. And that's why I want you to hear it, because I think otherwise, again, it's just so easy to see someone make a decision. And I think we're all so quick to then think we need to do the same thing or to like pull one part of it and apply it to our business. And if you have a podcast and you're like, I don't want a podcast anymore, or I don't want to spend expenses, or it's too, whatever the reasons are, or let's say you're on Instagram and you like don't want to do reels anymore. I'm using those as two examples before simply stopping something because you want to pivot or adapt or change the conversation you're having. If that's the part that like you grabbed onto from what I was saying, I would invite you to look holistically at your marketing strategy and to get clear on the strategy you're looking at dropping or pivoting or changing. What function is that serving in your marketing strategy? Are you doing that somewhere else? In which case, then you can afford to remove it, right, and to double down on the other. If not, what are you going to replace that with? And so I think this is where pick and stick is true. I think pick and stick just doesn't have to mean the exact same thing forever and ever and ever in your business. But what it does mean is within your marketing strategy and the customer journey you're building and the different elements of that strategy that your business needs, we want to pick and stick something in each of those. And so if you're going to modify or drop or change, right, we want to make sure we're subbing it with something else. Hopefully this is making sense. If you're dropping reels, for example, and reels have been a big way that you have gotten both visible but brought in new traffic, right? If you're going to drop those, you want to look at, so what am I putting in place of that to help get me in front of traffic and to help get me visible? Does this make sense, y'all? I'm hoping that this is landing. And Naomi says, saving this for later. Hey, Naomi, nice to see you here. Thank you. Definitely, if you have questions on the replay as well, when you come back, let me know. So that's what we want to think about. Now, what I did is, I'm sure you've heard different people talking about stacking strategies. When I brought on the podcast, I was stacking a strategy, right? I already had a nurture tool and I was stacking something on top of it, which is why it makes it easier to take that away without that affecting my business overall. Now, I'm actually stacking or subbing something back in for y'all because I also really, I don't know, I want to keep off. Sharing value is really important to me, and I do want to share this next conversation with y'all more. So if you haven't listened to the podcast yet, I will share here what we have done in place of the podcast, because I do know for many of you who listen to the podcast, you're probably not in the group right now, because I know we had some crossover, but I know for a lot of people who listen to the podcast, they don't like being on Facebook, or they really prefer the audio experience over the video experience. I know I've heard from some of you, it's funny, I was chatting on Instagram with a couple of people who are like, oh no, I love being in Facebook groups. I love watching you live. I like being there live and asking questions. So we're not getting rid of these live streams. I am going to be, that much more focused on making sure we're bringing you a mini masterclass every week, but we are turning these into a private podcast feed for you so that you will have evergreen access in audio form to all of our lives moving forward. So whether you want to join me live and also have the audio access, or you prefer to listen to the audio format, or you want to really have a library where you can go back and re-listen to the topics that are really relevant for you in the moment, that is going to be available to you. So, and I want you to hear this as well, because this is then what I was thinking about in terms of looking at my whole marketing strategy and kind of what function the podcast was serving, aside from this is a conversation I want to have. What I did think is I also want to serve that audience I've built there, and I don't want to just leave them hanging, and I don't want to just be like, peace, I don't know, no judgment. I know other people have done this with their podcasts, but I've just seen a lot of podcasts, they just end and disappear. And you're like, well, where do I find you next? What happens next? I've enjoyed this conversation. So that is what we're doing to sub in place of one question. It won't be exactly the same, but it's called The Vault, and it is a private podcast feed, and you will have mini masterclasses delivered to you weekly with the mindset and strategies that are working today to grow a 6 and 7 figure business. It is the conversations we're having in this Facebook group, and we will remove the beginning chit chat for you so it's a little bit easier to access, but all in private podcast form, which means when you sign up, we'll drop a link for this afterwards. When you sign up for it, what's really fun is, I haven't done a private podcast before. I don't know if any of y'all have used this, but it's so fun. You just set it up, and you can set it up right to your iTunes. It'll look just like a regular, one question, like a regular podcast, but it's private, meaning no one else has access to it. It's our private vault, and then you'll have access to all of these conversations. My team will upload them for you. So those will be there. We are not leaving you high or dry. But I want to keep coming back to this when it comes to the marketing strategy and components, because I'm very aware of modeling this and helping give understanding of this for those of you who are in different places in your business and how you might be interpreting and receiving this. I want you to notice how that is something, because I deeply desire to be of service and of value. Giving free value and not hiding behind a paywall has always just been one of my top values and priorities as a coach. We gave away a 6-week sales course for free for 2 years. Clearly that's one of the things I'm all about. So that's one of the reasons I did that. And because I also just did want to find a way to keep in connection and serving the audience we had grown and built there, so that we didn't just lose all of those people and understanding what they needed. But because that podcast was serving the same function in my marketing strategy, if we hadn't created the vault, right, that wouldn't have been a problem in my business. That wouldn't have, that isn't necessarily something we have to do in air quotes to stay in business. Even if anything, it's an additional expense in terms of time and team on the back end. That is more a choice because I chose to. And so I share this here because I want you to be able to think through this depending on what the circumstances are in your business, right? If you're looking at things, do you need to sub something in because you're removing a component of your marketing strategy altogether, right? If you have a podcast, or if you have live streams and you stop doing live streams, we'll use that as an example, and you're like, I'm going to stop going live, but you don't have another form of, I call it higher level content, but content that's deepening that relationship with your audience, I would invite you to think about, what are you going to sub in place? If you already have something else like a podcast or a blog or a weekly newsletter, right? I don't want you to feel like you have to then find a way to sub that or replace that. That is not that is not necessary. And of course, some of you might not be needing to get rid of anything in your strategy. It might be looking more holistically at what component in your marketing strategy actually needs a little love. Because if you're not bringing in consistent leads and consistent sales and clients, there's a very good chance there is something in your marketing strategy that either needs a little more attention and action, right? That's just the place you need to focus on right now. It needs a little gasoline, or we need to like put our foot on the gas there, or it needs to be implemented because it's not even been implemented, or it maybe needs some updating or refining, right? And I think that can be very helpful to diagnose in your business. And these are things that every stage of business we're always evaluating. If you're finding you're getting a ton of leads coming through the door and they're not converting, right, that might be a different problem to solve. That to me says, well, then maybe there's something on the messaging side, or maybe there's something in the sales process conversation side. But I really see what we're talking about here. This is the whole front end of your sales process. If you get your marketing strategy and the messaging driving your marketing strategy working for you, it makes sales really effing easy, right? That's when you get people who are landing on your sales page, getting onto calls with you, already knowing you're the person who want to hire, who have already worked through their objections because your strategy has done so much of that heavy lifting for you. So these are the components I would be looking at, but also these are the components I looked at that made this decision easy, so that when I made the decision, I could back it, I could show up fully for it. I didn't feel like I was in a decision or like, oh, but if I do this, then what happens in my business? I feel very confident knowing like, yes, of course I'm going to miss recording the podcast because I love the podcast, but also I can really see that business itself will be fine. And this allows me to move into this next season in business where I can have some deeper conversations with you in a different way. And we can always go back to the podcast in the future if that's something we choose to do. To see if we have any questions here. I don't think so, in which case I will hop off in a moment, but I'll just give it one more second for those questions, and I'll just check my notes. I don't think I had anything else for you. The main thing I wanted to share, yes, okay. So it's just to kind of put a bow on this. So I think hopefully it's helpful to hear why I made this decision and what's next, and would definitely love to have you inside the vault, the private podcast feed, even if you're feeling like, Kim, I like to come to your lives because then I can ask questions, and I prefer to have you live, to be very honest, because I like having the conversation with you, and it is when I can hear from you and address any questions you have. But I would still invite you to come join the vault. We won't be sending weekly email reminders, so you won't get a ton of emails blowing up your inbox, but I do think it's a really valuable just asset library to have, because you'll always have access. You don't have to scroll through the Facebook group to find that one live stream that had that nugget you really wanted to review. You can just go through that feed anytime you want, pop your earbuds in, listen while you're on a walk, listen while you're on a run, listen while you're in the car. So I would love to have you join me there. I think it's just a really nice library, if nothing else, to have, but also for those of you who prefer that format of learning as opposed to the audio visual. And then again, just as a recap with that, and I'll just give those components to you, your marketing strategy, if you're looking at it, is to make it as simple as possible. We're looking at a traffic source. How are you getting visible to that traffic source? Seeing those as two different pieces. Do you have a strategy for nurturing, right? So are we bringing in new relationships, and then do we have a strategy to nurture and to deepen those relationships? And then do you have a conversion tool? So we didn't talk about a conversion tool too much in this live stream. I will again drop a link to my free masterclass, The Path to Consistent 10K Months. It breaks this down more in depth so you can apply this to your business and to put this all into place, because you need all of those pieces. And so again, use this as a way to diagnose what your business needs you to focus on, what your business needs you to implement. If you're not getting the results you want, right, where you maybe need to put a little more attention or a little bit more refinement. And if you're listening to this and you're like, love this, Kim, hear this. Also, I'm one of those people. It's I've got one part of my strategy working really well. I'm really great at building an audience, or I'm really great at nurturing my people. But what I notice I'm missing is I don't have the traffic source, or I'm not bringing in the right people, or they're not coming in consistently, or the conversion tool piece, I'm not sure what that is. That's literally what I'm supporting people with in my new strategy intensive, the Your Marketing Multiplied Strategy Intensive. It is a week-long intensive where we take a look at your marketing strategy and get really clear on mapping that out so it's specific to you and your business, and get really clear on if there are any gaps to close, what those are, if not, what we need to dial in or dial up within your marketing strategy so that it is working like that well-oiled machine, and it's working with what's working today in 2024, not what was working in 2020. So you are building that pipeline, but specifically building that pipeline with those people who are the right fit for your offer and teaching them why you're the person they want to hire. And we do that by, after we map out your marketing strategy, we're revisiting your key messaging. So not your like bio or your like one sentence that you like never fucking use. I don't understand that with messaging. I feel like messaging has gotten so confused in our space to just be like an I help statement. That is useful, but I'm so much more interested in what are the key messaging aspects. Do we know how to speak to your audience? Do we understand what they're thinking? Do we understand their pain points? Do we understand what they actually want? Do we know how to put that messaging into your marketing strategy? Because when you have those pieces together, right, that's how you not only fill up a pipeline of potential clients, but they're the right potential clients who are the right fit for your offer, and who, when you have that sales call or they get on the sales page or they come to your conversion event, right, they're already warmed up and they already know why they want to hire you. So I could go on and on. I'm like obsessed about this. It is one of my favorite things to support clients with, aside from the mindset behind it all. So we are booking some of those for April. I've opened up my Fridays that I usually take off to do a few more of those, because I just know this is what everybody needs support with right now. So I will drop a link to that as well if you are interested in taking me up on one of those. And then if you have any questions, drop them for me, and I will be back next week with another topic for you. And I will see you all then. Lots of love. Bye.